Okay, greetings everybody. We're here with our panelists. We're here for Step by Step tonight, so it's good to see everybody trickling in as they get their Zoom connected. We have, we're all from, Jane and I are in Virginia right now, but everybody else is from all over the world at the moment, so.
I see a lot of familiar names in the participant list, and I see a lot of new names too. It's really, really nice to see everybody out here. Thanks for coming out.
We're excited to have everybody. I'm gonna give it a couple minutes to let people, like I said, trickle in and get connected, because we had about 300 people sign up for tonight. So we'll see if we can get better than 55 of them here.
Well, and Catherine, if you don't mind me asking, maybe what our attendees can do is, would you drop into the chat where you're coming in from and what you're currently working on? Like, are you working on a novel, a memoir, and what stage are you at?
I'm already seeing some San Antonio, Green Bay, Omaha. That's great. Just bring a little slice of Virginia to your living rooms tonight. It's supposed to snow here tomorrow in Virginia.
What?
Right.
Here in Costa Rica, it is 78 and sunny. Beautiful. Love this. People working on novels, working on a book of poetry to self-publish. That's a great path for poetry. Oh, yay, Lisa. Yes, we did publish one of your essays on brevity. Thanks for sending it in. That's fantastic.
Halen's from Greensboro, but grew up in Virginia. I'm from North Carolina and grew up in Virginia as well. A couple Richmond people enjoying the temperature as it starts dropping in preparation for whatever craziness is going on tomorrow. Okay, well, I'm going to let people just go ahead and continue trickling on in as we start, because I know you ladies have a lot to cover and that we only have an hour here. And we want to give time for maybe a few questions at the end. I'm Catherine Herndon. I'm with James River Writers. I'm the executive director there. We're out of Richmond, Virginia, but we do have a lot of interesting programs online, sort of like this one. So if you are interested in learning more about writing or writing your book or your poetry book, come check us out. This is Step by Step, how to plan, write, and edit your book. It's hosted by us as part of the 2022 Virginia Festival of the Book, which is a wonderful festival in Charlottesville, also online this year. And this event is one in a series of 6 that's devoted to the Virginia writing and publishing, presented by writing centers and organizations across Virginia, including 1455 Literary Arts, the Muse Writers Center, Randolph College MFA, Watershed Lit, Center for Literary Engagement. That was all one thing. Watershed Lit, Center for Literary Engagement, and Publishing Practice, and WriterHouse. Also, like I said, James River Writers. So the full series of Virginia writing and publishing events are available at vabook.org. And I'll throw some things in the chat once we get started so you guys can have those as we go along. But vabook.org is a great place to find all this information. You probably found it. Thanks, Jane. You probably found it in order to get here tonight. This is being recorded. It's being recorded right now. So if you don't catch everything, you want to go back and listen to it again, that'll be up on the Virginia Book Festival website. They also have a lot of other great programs up there on the website to for you to enjoy and look at your leisure. So take a look at that. And while you're there, please consider making a donation to the Virginia Festival of the Book. All of their programming, the majority of their programming, not all, they do have some ticketed events, but an enormous amount of their programming is free and open to the public, and they really need donations to help keep that going. So please consider that. And now I am absolutely delighted to introduce our speakers for the evening for Step by Step, how to plan, write, and edit your book. We have Jennie Nash, author of Blueprint for a Book, Build Your Novel from the Inside Out. She's the founder and CEO of Author Accelerator, a company on a mission to lead the emerging book coaching industry. Jennie's clients have landed 6-figure book deals and spots on the New York Times bestseller list. So it's very exciting. Allison K. Williams is the author of 7 Drafts, Self-Edit Like a Pro, From Blank Page to Book. She's edited and coached writers to deals with big 5 publishers and also small presses. She's written for NPR, CBC, and the New York Times. She serves as Brevity's social media editor, and I think somebody on here was talking about having been published on Brevity, so definitely check that out. And she co-hosts the Writer's Bridge. And then we have our moderator, Jane Friedman. Jane has 20 years of experience in the publishing industry. She's the editor of The Hot Sheet, the essential industry newsletter for authors, and has previously worked for FW Media, the Virginia Quarterly Review. In 2019, Jane was awarded Publishing Commentator of the Year by Digital Book World. Her newsletter was awarded Media Outlet of the Year in 2020. Definitely worth checking out if you want more information about the publishing world and the writing world. So as you can see, it's going to be a really amazing panel, and we're really glad to have all of you here with us. Thank you for joining us. It's all yours. I'm going to spotlight you guys and make sure you show up on the screen, and I'm going away. So have a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine.
That was funny, Allison. I'm Jenny.
I'm Allison.
All
Someone
right.
asked in the chat, who was who? Could we identify ourselves? And I said, I've got the palm trees. Jenny looks the classiest, and Jane is a beautiful vintage shade.
Very nice. Okay, so let's dive in right away. I want to go straight to the most divisive topic in writing, which is plotting versus pantsing. So I really don't know of any topic like this that encourages as much discussion and disagreement, because people feel strongly about outlining and planning prior to writing or not. So, I'm not going to put any words in either of your mouths. I'll just ask you, where do you fall on this issue? And let's start with Jenny, because certainly your book title indicates where you might fall, blueprint for your book.
Yeah, there is no mystery here. I'm going to drive a wedge further into this conversation. I mean, people often claim that they don't want to plan because it's going to wreck with their creative mojo or their creative flow or energy or whatever they want to call it. And I just don't think creativity is that fragile. I actually believe that creativity thrives in boundaries and constraints. It's no different from a basketball game where there's a set of rules, and within those rules, people shine and they rise to their amazing heights. And the same is true with a book of any kind, that the planning are the rules that you're setting for your story, and creativity can thrive within those boundaries. I just think you have to plan. I see so much. The reason I say that is I just see so many people hurt themselves, cost themselves time and frustration and overwhelm and energy because they don't want to plan. So yeah, I come down way on the side of planning. What about you, Allison?
Well, and they write themselves into a corner if they don't know where they're going. Like, I like to think of the plan for your book as it's this beautiful map. And yeah, you're going to dash off into the woods here, and there's a beautiful sunset you want to pause and look at there, but you want to keep moving forward. That said, I myself usually plan a little bit later in the process. When I'm writing a book, I write the beginning, I write the end, I write a couple of scenes in the middle, and then I outline and figure out what's missing. And I often recommend that for writers who have gone into their first draft without a plan, because it's not an irrevocable situation. I say, write as much as you can, and then map out your events against a dramatic structure, or paste up your index cards on the wall, or use Scrivener, something that lets you assess your dramatic material in terms of how each moment is serving your book. Because very often when we get to the end of that first draft, even if we did make a plan to begin with, there are scenes that duplicate other scenes in dramatic intention. There are characters who these two people could actually be one person, and their name needs to be Bruce instead of Bob. And I do think that the planning is incredibly valuable, but for me, it usually does come in later in the process.
Do either of you think genre considerations play into this? Like, for example, I often hear genre fiction authors talk much more about the plotting and the outlining rather than, say, a literary fiction author.
I think memoirists very often need to write their way to the end of the book before they know the story they're about to tell. And then they need to go back and rewrite it with a plan. Jennie, what do you encounter?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. I think that there can be an unusual structure. So for example, in memoir, there's been a lot of, I've read a lot this past year about decolonizing the memoir or the writing workshop. And there's a lot of emphasis on linear structure being one way, and there's other ways of writing. There's spiral structures, there's fractured structures, you know, all kinds of things like that. And I think oftentimes in memoir, people may be looking for an unusual container to hold their tale or to tell their tale, which you can, I agree with Allison, you can find your way by writing, and sometimes you have to find your way by writing a little bit, but those structures are not random. They might look nonlinear when you're reading them, or you might feel a little unstable while you're reading them, which the writer wants you to feel probably, but they're not random. And that's the point. So I don't think there's a genre that escapes the imperative to plan. That's my belief.
I started as a playwright, and one of the great things about playwriting is that if there is a scene that is not well shaped or a character who is not well written, an actor will stop in the middle of rehearsal and look at you and say, I don't know why my character's in this scene. Like, what do I want here? And you've got 24 hours to figure out what that is before the next night's rehearsal, or the same actor will stop in the exact same place.
That's amazing.
Well, this kind of brings us into, especially what you said, Jennie, about recognized story structures. There are all sorts of, I don't want to call them formulas necessarily, but certain parameters to help people build successful narratives. So like one of the most infamous is the hero's journey. There's Save the Cat, Story Grid, Wired for Story. Like I could go down a list of a dozen other methods. Do you have a take on such systems? And are there any that you tend to go back to again and again? And I'll start with Allison.
I love me a good 5-act structure, either the 5-act or the 3-act, or I think thrillers and mysteries often follow a 4-act structure. And what I love about them is it's not that your beautiful creative idea must exactly fit this structure, but when you plan out your book against that structure, it makes you go, oh, well, normally there would be rising action here, and this is kind of a quiet scene. Why do I want this scene here? Is it serving a purpose to lower the tension instead of raising the tension here? And if you can't come up with a good reason, then maybe you want to move it somewhere else. So I like that mapping a fairly arbitrary structure can often help me discover something about my book that I needed to know. I'm working on a young adult novel where when I finally sat down after about 9 or 10 drafts and mapped it against the structure, I'm like, oh, the first scene really opens with a bang. And then the second scene, the girl takes a nap in the library. And the third scene, she recounts everything we already know to a new character. And I'm like, oh, but I didn't realize that until I plotted it out on a graph and went, oh, the energy is not high in this section.
There's just as a side note, there's a really fascinating piece of AI software now that will tell you by analyzing the words and other things where those highs and lows are. I'm not going to say it's perfect at analyzing it, but there are people who are trying to give you that information in a very swift and savvy way. I'll put the link in the chat if anyone's curious about exploring that. Jennie?
Very cool. Well, I coached Lisa Cron on Wired for Story and on Story Genius, and I taught for many years with her. We taught her method. And what was fascinating to me was that there were always people who it was just like light bulbs going off of their head, alarms ringing. They just finally understood what a novel was. And it was like, I am devoted to this method for the rest of my life. And then there were people who just found it entirely baffling and could not follow it, did not understand it. They fell into that thing. I call it like the A student thing, like, okay, so this is what I have to do here. And then, okay, wait, now here, well, I don't understand. And, like they're so focused on trying to get it right that they're not really writing a novel. They're just trying to get the method right. And so my answer is that the best guide is the one that speaks to you, right? Like if it doesn't speak to you, it's not going to help you. Or if you're, square peg and round hole kind of thing, it's not going to do anything for you. So, the best guide is the one that works for you. And what's so fun to me about the writing world is, I think this is true with a lot of worlds. Everybody has all the books. Like it's so great, right? We all read all the books and we all have all the books, and a new one comes out and it's like, oh yay. Allison has a recent book out. It's fabulous. And, goes on the shelf with all the others. And what I'm always trying to do as a book coach is, what does that writer need? What does that story need? What's going to get them to unlock the thing? And, we're often trying to learn how to do this thing while we do it. We're trying to learn how to write while we're writing the book. And so, read all the guides and find the one that works. And if it doesn't work for you, there's another one.
I think it's a lot like choosing an artistic medium. There are painters who are going to work in oils, and they are going to slowly build up layers and colors and not be able to, work very quickly, and they're going to be able to change stuff. And oil paint behaves in a very certain way. If you're going to work in oils, you're going to work within the constructure of oils. Whereas watercolor artists, it's like, get it on the page because you only got 10 seconds until it's dry, and then you've got what you've got. And neither one of those is a superior method of making art. But some artists want to be watercolorists and some of them want to be oil painters. It's the same as there are writers who carefully plot everything out and, work as they go. There are writers who, I don't know where it's going, but I'm going to edit yesterday's work until I find out where today's work is going. And I think the really important part is pick a method you like and then keep moving forward instead of buying another writing craft book and letting it sit on your shelf, which I say with great respect for us.
Recently, I was in a class with James Scott Bell, who has written some books on plot and structure, and he's done one on writing your novel from the middle. And I could see, even though not everyone, I think, was going to follow his advice to the letter, you could see the aha moments for people when he explained what he meant by this. There's this point in the middle of the book where your character is going to have this moment of truth, and even if you don't necessarily agree with him on, that's true for every story, I think sometimes it's like, what's the saying about many paths, one truth? I think a lot of the different systems are ultimately pointing to the same truth about what a story has to accomplish. So, and there are many ways to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, let's say I've managed the first draft. I've got it down. It's probably crappy. What should my next step be, Jennie?
Well, I think the first thing would be to congratulate yourself and do something to celebrate, because it's really hard to do that. And a lot of people never get that far, and nobody's waiting for your book or really understands how hard you worked except you. So do something tangible to celebrate. And I just really recommend that. And then the next thing would be, for me, would be to assess it, figure out what is really on the page. And it's very difficult to do this for our own selves. It's really hard to see what is really there. And I just finished reading The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum. It's this fabulous new novel about a young Black violinist trying to make his way in the classical music world. It's just fantastic. And what really struck me is that this kid is for a long time really at a loss because he hasn't had a mentor or a teacher or a tutor or a trainer. And this is really emphasized that all the other kids have had this all along. He hasn't had this. And his big break comes when somebody listens to him, like really takes the time to listen to him. And the book builds, I'm not giving anything away, it builds sort of denouement where he's competing in the Tchaikovsky competition, which is this world-class elite violin competition. And he goes out and hires 3 different instructors for each of the 3 pieces he's going to be playing in this competition. He gets on a plane and flies to be with these teachers so that they can listen to him play so that he can get better. And I think that's the same. We need the same thing with writing. We need somebody else, that outside gaze, to show us what is here, what is working, what is good, what is resonant, and to help us see what's there, to hold a mirror up to us. And this can be so many different kinds of people. It can be a critique partner. It can be, a writing group if it's structured in a good way. It can be somebody that you pay to do this. So many different options for that. But I just think an assessment, a really clear-eyed assessment about what is really here, then you can figure out, how do I move forward?
And I'll say too, that sometimes that person who can do the assessment is you, if you can leave your manuscript alone for 6 to 8 weeks before you come back and look at it, because it is amazing what shows up when you are looking with fresh eyes. I call it the vomit draft, not original to me. Jenny Elder Moak has a really great version. She calls it the grocery draft. Your first draft is where you have gathered all of your supplies and placed them on the counter. Your next draft is figuring out, okay, what kind of meal is this going to make? And if you're a plotter, you have a recipe.
So Allison, this brings us to how your book is structured, which is you have this 7-stage process. Can you talk us through how you move people through those stages, what they're like?
Yeah, so for the process that I came up with, and I actually came up with this because I was teaching a writing workshop in Bombay, India, and somebody said, well, how many drafts do you have to do? And I just kind of winged this off the top of my head, and it has since become the backbone of what I believe. So you've got your first draft, your vomit draft, you're just getting everything onto the page. You might use it all, you might not. Your second draft is your story draft. That's where you might map it against a dramatic structure or remap it if you've already mapped once. That's where you figure out, does this whole thing hang together? Does it make sense? Does it pay off at the end? Is it satisfying? Your third draft is your character draft. And that's where you look at each character who's a major character. Do they have something that they want? Is there an obstacle stopping them from getting what they want? And is there conflict, which is not just fighting? In conflict, 2 people want different things and only one of them can win. Your fourth draft is your technical draft. And that's where I say, go through, polish all your sentences, make sure, this is a really simple, silly thing that will make your writing 10% better right now, which is as often as you can, start and finish your sentences with strong verbs and nouns. So not ending with it. It's nothing to do with, oh, don't end a sentence with a preposition. It's that ending a sentence with a concrete noun is a stronger choice. So wow, that is an interesting pet on Jane's desk versus Jane has a cat on her desk. So it's clean, it's precise. Your fifth draft is your personal copy edit, which is where you just clean it up yourself as best you can to be kind to your readers. Your sixth draft is your friend read, where you get people who are your peers to read your book. And your seventh draft is your editorial read. And that can be either a writing partner who you believe is better than you at what you're doing, or that can be somebody that you pay. That's
excellent.
It. Yeah. And I call it 7 drafts because if I called it 17 drafts, no one would buy the book.
Now, Jennie, you have a method that involves creating a beat sheet. And do you want to tell us about when this gets created and how you use it?
Yeah, it's ideally before you start to write. It's an outline. It's a 3-page outline. I call it the inside outline, and it marries the plot and the point at the major steps of the novel. And I made it because I was so tired of seeing manuscripts that fell apart, and they fall apart fast. And I tried to get at, why do they fall apart? What exactly is going on here? And at Author Accelerator, when we teach our book coaches, we have something we call the hierarchy of editorial concerns. And the basic idea is don't start fussing with grammar if the foundation of the story is bad. It's kind of a simple idea, but it's that there's levels that you have to pay attention to. And what I found was that people were so focused on craft all the time, and craft, I mean, is hugely important. You have to know how to write dialogue. You have to know, I mean, this is what Allison's 7 drafts get at. Don't do that until the later drafts, like you're not going to worry about the words of the sentences in her vomit draft. It's the same thing. And I saw so many people with beautiful writing that just went nowhere. And so I tried to come up with a method that solved for this problem before people even made the problem. And so the inside outline is designed to get you to get the underlying narrative logic locked in before you start to write. And in a perfect world, which it is not, everybody that worked with me or one of my coaches would start at that place, and they don't. So when they come with the manuscript that is flawed, because most of them are, just by virtue of they're very complex. A novel is a very complex intellectual and creative thing that you have made, and so there's going to be flaws, and the inside outline can be used as a measuring stick against those flaws, so you can retrofit into it to see where is this falling apart. And again, it's designed to be a purely structural narrative tool and not stripping out all of the craft. So that's all we're looking at is, does this hold together on a logical level? And I was just working with a middle grade writer. I mean, this is why I love what I do. It was so much fun. This is a writer who was very accomplished. She's written 5 books in different genres, and she was turning to middle grade fiction for the first time. So she's working on this inside outline. And I mean, it's just 3 pages. It's tiny. And it's a summer camp. It's a summer camp book. Like, who doesn't love a summer camp book? And we're just going back and forth, like, oh, plot hole. Oh, character flaw. Oh, we got to redo this. Oh, we got to start all over again. Oh, actually, that's not going to work. Let's throw that out and do this other thing. And just this sort of back and forth on the logic of what the story is, and is it going to pay off at the end? And that resonance in 3 pages before you even write anything. And I just think that that's huge fun. So I love this tool, and I love working with this tool. And just like we spoke about before, for some people, it's a tool that they're like, oh, this is amazing. I totally get it. It works for me. And other people, are spending weeks just trying to understand what I'm talking about. Well, then that's not for you, So I happen to love my tool, though.
Well, we're now getting into the part of the writing and revising process where I find things get really mushy. Some people call it the mushy middle, but it can extend beyond the middle. And, one of the things that I hear repeatedly is that from agents and from editors is that there's this really refined query or Twitter pitch or approach or proposal, maybe your really excellent first chapter or 2, and then things just fall apart. And Jennie, I think you're saying that one of the reasons for this is the writer hasn't married the plot to the point. What are some other things that can happen to manuscripts, common problems that you see? And we'll start with Allison.
Well, I mean, I think one of the most common problems is we take our first 10 or our first 25 pages to workshop. And so those get polished up really nicely. And we don't put that same kind of attention into the later parts of the book. A lot of books slow down in the middle. And I think some of that, the way to address that is to ask of each scene, who wants what? What's the conflict? Is there tension? Is somebody trying to get something that they cannot yet have? Or do they need to get this thing so that they can discover they need this other thing that they cannot yet have? And it really is very architectural work. It may not even feel particularly creative. I recently printed out my own manuscript and went through with colored pencils and went, okay, here is conflict. Here is tension. Oh, look, this is a whole 6 paragraphs of setting. Maybe I don't need 6 paragraphs here. And what it really comes down to is being willing to cut your own words, going, okay, I have some good stuff and some great stuff. Let's cut the good stuff. But I think a lot of it does come from not giving the middle that same kind of detailed examination that we give the beginning of the book and the end of the book. An exercise that I often recommend people try, because many books start too late. In particular, I think a lot of memoirs start with too much family history and backstory. And I think a lot of YA fantasy and adult fantasy starts with too much world building. Take pages 50 to 70 of your book and send them to somebody who's not read your book before and doesn't know the story. Ask them to make a list. What do you know from these pages? Do you know the setting? Do you know the conflict? Do you know the characters? What do you wish you knew? Then go back and anything they know, cut it out of that first 50 pages. Because if they know it on page 51, you don't need to tell them about it prior to that, and then stuff that they wish they knew, keep that in. But a lot of books, we need that running start as the writer, that authorial throat clearing to get the story down ourselves, to write our way into the story we're really going to tell.
That's so smart. You guys should write that down. That is just gold right there. So smart. I love it. I love it. I mean, what would I add to that? I think Allison's absolutely right. The workshop structure focuses so much on those first pages. I think the pitch culture focuses on those first pages. The sort of fast pitch world, does that. And look, trying to get somebody to read, 50 or 75 pages of your work and pay close attention is hard. People are busy and your friends are probably tired of it. And your writing partners are probably in their own work. It's hard to get somebody to pay attention to your story in the way that you pay attention to your story. And I think that there is also just a general lack of understanding of what revision really is. I find that people don't really know what it is. There's a fabulous little book by Susan Bell called The Artful Edit that, it's probably 20 or so years old at this point, but it's just this fabulous book about really what revision is, and the idea that there's macro elements and there's micro elements. And I think too often people are focusing on these micro elements and the little fiddly details. And part of that is because that's what's fun about writing. What's fun is losing yourself in a beautiful sentence or describing a beautiful world or a beautiful setting or whatever the thing is. And I can't believe that Catherine pulled that book up that fast. She's got some fast fingers.
Good.
Thank you, Catherine. Right. But that's part of what writers are drawn to, is the beauty of the words and the power of the words and the clarity of expression that you can find when you spend that time with a sentence. But that's not what revision is. That's not what's going to get you big results. It's much more, Allison used the word architectural. I love that. It's much more structural. It's much more about the function of the thing. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about planning. I think sometimes people just want to do the parts that are fun, and they don't want to do the parts that are hard. And then they're frustrated about why it's not working, or why am I getting rejected, or why are my books not selling, or why whatever, fill in the blank. And it's because there's parts of writing that are really fun, but there's a lot that's hard work. And I often think of heavy lifting, like for some reason at certain points in the revision process, I think of a bulldozer, like an earth mover. Like it feels physical sometimes when you're doing the work. It's Allison talked about colored pencils. You're dealing with a huge amount of material and you're trying to understand it and assess it and measure it and sort through it. And it's big. There's a lot of pieces to it. And so I think that in a lot of these problems are caused by people kind of not wanting to do the hard thing. And I mean, I hate to say that because, we all want to do the part that's fun, but I recently just watched a bunch of the Olympics. I don't know if anybody else was tuned into that, but gosh, it's just crazy the way these athletes, everything comes down to seconds and hundreds of seconds in some cases. And you see them doing their thing, and they've got such mastery over their bodies in the world and in space. And, whether it's the ice skaters or the skiers, and it's like, wow, they go 80 miles an hour down the hill, and you're watching them and you're like, how does somebody learn how to do that with such sort of mastery and joy to what they're doing? And the answer is a whole heck of a lot of hard work in the gym that probably was really not fun, that hurt, that nobody was watching or applauding or anything. And I think the same is really true with writing, and that we have to bring that seriousness of purpose to the work.
And Jennie, I think you really have a great analogy there with the athlete thing. I was a circus performer for many years before I switched to writing full time. And the nice thing about circus is you get to watch your peers and the people who are much better than you fall on their butts over and over and over again. And writing is one of the few arts where we don't get to watch our peers fail. Like even in visual art class, when it's sketching time, they walk around and they look at each other's easels. In dance class, you can see who the teacher's yelling at. You can see who didn't get that jump or didn't complete that turn. Even in music, you're often rehearsing next to other people. You can hear it when they hit the wrong note. And there's a great discussion going on in the chat about beta reading, which is, reading for another writer. And that is one of the most valuable things you can do for your own work, because it is so much easier to spot problems in other people's work. Because when we read our own work, our brain fills in what's not actually on the page. And so it's hard to see what's not really there. But as writers, there's that myth of, Anne Lamott's shitty first draft. But we never see our famous writers, the ones we look up to and admire. We never see their first drafts. So it's hard to believe, it's like, yes, Virginia, there really is a shitty first draft. And it's really hard as writers to not get to see the early failures of our peers.
Yeah, I think
that's so well said.
Thanks.
Working as an editor at a literary journal very early in my career and judging lots of writing contests at Writer's Digest taught me so much about writing that I would not have otherwise learned. So I just want to put a thumbs up on that one. Jennie, when you were talking about the hard work is not about this at a sentence level, there are these bigger architectural issues that have to be resolved. One of the ways I see this often manifest itself is a writer is told there's this big problem somewhere in the book. And so the writer ends up adding a prologue to fix it.
Oh.
Danger, Will Robinson, danger.
Yeah. And this is why I think agents and editors hate prologues, because they're often in response to a problem that's been identified that no one wants to deal with, or the writer doesn't want to deal with. That's my theory.
Prologues are promises. Like if you are going to slap a prologue on the beginning, it needs to pay off big time later on. Either the prologue needs to establish something important is going to be happening later, like at the beginning of Donna Tartt's The Secret History, they shove Bunny off a cliff on page 1. And the next 285 pages are the reader gradually coming to the realization that Bunny gets what's coming to him, and you've got to keep in mind that your prologue is you're promising the reader there is a connection that will pay off later. Remember this little jewel. You're going to need it to get through the magic door in Act 3.
Okay, so let's talk about bringing in others to the process. I mean, Jennie, you're clearly an advocate for getting that other set of eyes. How do you know when you're ready for that, though? At what point? I mean, Allison, I know you have a kind of a prescriptive around this, but some people are still confused about when they feel like their manuscript has reached that point. Jennie, can you start us off with any tips here?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really big question, actually, because you don't want to bring somebody in to work that's fragile, that's going to crush it too soon. That's not going to be any good. And you also don't want to bring anybody in too late. One of the things that often happens is people think that the time to seek that outside gaze or the other eye is when it's perfect, like when it's so tight in their mind that it's good enough to give to somebody else. But that's in many ways asking for the wrong thing, because what you're then asking for is actually praise. What you want is somebody to say, oh my gosh, this is so great, I love it so much, you're amazing. Like, so seeking outside help is in my mind about knowing what you need and being brave enough to ask for what you need. And it's I mean, I'll give a perfect example. My sister has a PhD in music theory. She is one of the smartest people that I know. She's a huge reader. And when I would give her manuscripts, she would just rip them apart, just shred them apart. And there was a time and a place for that, but I didn't want it at the wrong time. And so I got into the habit of knowing this is the time I want her to rip it apart. This is the reader I want at this moment in time. And she was incredibly valuable at those moments in time. So you have to know, what am I asking for here? And sometimes I think people really don't know what to ask for because they want so much that validation that they're usually asking some version of that. And what I loved about what Allison talked about earlier is giving people pages and asking something very specific of those pages. I think a great thing to do is to give pages to people and say, please tell me as honestly as you possibly can when you stop reading this for the first time, when you put it down and you put it aside. And I want to know where that came. Was it chapter 1? Was it chapter 5? Was it I had to go to sleep because I couldn't stop reading? Knowing that information is enormously valuable, but it's scary to ask because, first of all, are people going to actually be honest with you? Depends on your relationship with them. Probably not. It's really hard to be that honest with somebody. So it's knowing what do I need? What does this work need? Where do I think I think the best feedback in the whole world is feedback that resonates with something you already think is true with your work. So
it's when you have that moment where the person says something and you go, oh, I thought I could get away with that, but I kind of knew I wasn't getting away with that.
But that means knowing that thing about what you're trying to do or not do or get away with, or what, is this, like, I have an exercise in the blueprint where I ask people, what's your nightmare book review? And when I work with clients on this, they'll usually just toss something off. I'm like, no, what's your nightmare book review? Like, really the thing that you do not want anybody to ever say. And if people are honest about that, you get down to things like, why am I listening to this white woman whine about her privileged life when the world's falling apart? It's like, okay, that's really helpful, right? Because now we can go out and measure, is that coming across in these pages? Is this a problem for the reader? Does that, resonate with what I really feel? But you have to be willing to know that hard thing that you kind of don't really want to hear. And then you have to ask in such a way that people will be willing to tell it to you. And all of those things are actually really difficult to find. And I think that I actually wrote about this on your site, Jane, like 5 years ago, about the dangers of writing groups. Because I think sometimes you get in these echo chambers where maybe there's a writer who everybody thinks is better than everybody else. And they're like, oh, she's so good. And oh, this is so great. And oh, read us another chapter. And there's kind of this bias towards being positive, or a bias toward, weird things like maybe it shouldn't be a mystery and it should be a love story.
Jennie, you know what I've seen a lot lately is writers who are in writing groups, and writing groups think readers are stupid. Oh, you'd better explain this more. The readers might not get it. Well, you got it. You know what I'm doing. And I find that that's really something that happens a lot. I also dropped into the chat. There's a blog post over at Brevity, which has a whole list of questions you might ask your beta readers. Sorry, Jennie, go ahead.
No, I'm so done. And that's a great resource. Tell me what you think of all that.
And I love what you said, Jenny, about not too early, not too late. For some years now, I've offered a service through my editing, which is the submission package. And I take a look at people's query, synopsis, and first 10 pages. And what I'm discovering is a lot of times the problems are problems that should have been addressed 3 or 4 drafts ago. This book is not ready to go out. This book has not been ready to go out for a long time. And I've started offering another thing, which is it a book? Which is where I look at potentially your synopsis and the first 25 pages and say, here are the problems that I'm seeing. You need to fix this writing craft element. The story hasn't started yet. We don't like this character and we don't want to spend any time with them, and just being very blunt, because the problem is very rarely a lack of ability or a lack of desire or even a lack of talent. It is almost always a lack of time. The number one thing that makes us better writers, better artists, better teachers, better parents is time. And you've got to be willing to set your book down, back away from it slowly, and then come back after some time has passed. You've got to be willing to send it to your beta reader and take that feedback that might well hurt your feelings and go, okay, right now I'm feeling my feelings. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to look at this again and I'm going to go, okay, where are they just a big stupid head and where are they right?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's, I think along with time, there's also energy. And sometimes what happens is people seek feedback at a point where they don't have the energy to fix it. They're done. They're sort of toast. And they kind of have it's almost like what's that thing where the horse runs to the barn? There's a word for that. They bolt for the barn. It's almost like the writer's ready to bolt to the pitch. Like, I just want to put this out. I just want to see what happened. They don't have the energy to be in it longer. That's way too late to seek feedback, right?
The number one difference between writers who publish and writers who don't is that writers who publish keep working after they feel entitled to be done.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's so real. And it's the reason why I come back again and again to doing work before you start to write and seeking help as soon in the process as you can, actually, just because then you still have the energy to do all the fixing. It's actually fun to do the fixing at that stage, where it's not so fun when you're throwing out 350 pages that you've spent 10 years working on.
So I have one more question I want to pose, and then we're going to open it up to everyone attending. So if you have any questions for Jenny or Allison, please put them in the Q&A box. So we've talked about getting feedback. This could be from critique group partners. Allison, you mentioned paid options that you offer, and of course, many people offer. How do you know if it's a good investment to pay money to an editor? And let's assume this is a significant investment. We're not talking about a $50 whatever. We're talking about thousands of dollars. How do you know that this is the right step?
You should always get a sample edit. If you're working with a book coach, maybe that's the introductory phone call. Maybe it's 20 minutes where you get the vibe and you kind of see, do they support your goals? Are you a good match together? If you are getting an editor to edit your whole manuscript, get feedback on 10 or 15 pages. Some editors do it for free. Some editors charge. I charge because you're going to get your money's worth from me on that 10 pages and I put in the time. But it is very important to get that sample edit and see what it is exactly that you are buying. And does this feedback resonate with you? Is it strict enough? Is it kind enough? Is it, prescriptive enough? Like I'm a very prescriptive editor. I will say to people, actually, your story needs to begin over here. You need to include this, cut that scene, combine these 2 characters. Where I find in a lot of literary workshops, people are going, well, I just want to question this moment here. And it's like, I don't have time for that. Just freaking cut the scene. Let's move on here. So it's but that's not going to be the right vibe for some people. There's authors who are going to have a terrible time with me. There are authors who are going to have a fabulous time with me. The same is true with Jane. The same is true with Jenny. So you've got to make sure before you plunk down 4 figures for an edit or 4 or 5 figures for book coaching over a long period of time, that you are signing up to purchase something you want. You probably would not stage your wedding at a restaurant where you had never had a meal. You got to at least get in there, get the appetizer, decide, oh, hey, man, we love Greek food. This is amazing. Let's go. Or, oh, no, this is just not my thing. So get that sample.
Jennie?
I mean, I think that the first thing you have to know is why you're writing the book. So the very first question in my blueprint book is, why are you doing this? And that's going to inform the kind of help that you seek, because there are a lot of different reasons to write a book, a lot of different reasons to write a book that range from, I just want to see if I can do it, to it's fun and I find it relaxing or therapeutic, to, I want to make this my day job. There's so many different reasons to write a book. And it doesn't make any sense to seek expensive professional guidance if your goals don't warrant it. So, really getting clear on what you're doing this for. Why are you doing it? And I once worked with a client who was coming up upon his 50th high school reunion, and he wanted to write the story of a road trip that he took when he was 16 years old with one of the classmates from this high school. And actually, Jane, they were from Cleveland. And this reunion, this high school group, and this story is a sad one. Upon returning from this road trip, this other boy took his own life. And the author of this story had been living with this for 50 years, and he wanted to write it and print copies and give them to everybody at the high school to remember their classmate and to have him be present. The author happened to be an advertising executive. He was a fantastic writer. It was a beautiful book. He had no intention of getting an agent or a book deal or anything like that. He just wanted to do a really good job to honor his friend. So in that case, he happened to seek out help from me, but he could very easily have just said, I'm just going to do this because that's my intention. I don't need to spend a lot of money to get this book into the world. I've worked with on the nonfiction side with business writers who want to write a book to give to all their clients. They don't care if it's available on Amazon or at Barnes and Noble, so it's really understanding your why. And what people fail to realize is that seeking an agent and a traditional publishing deal is the top of the highest peak that you can climb in this industry. And those publishers are not putting these books out for fun. People love books, but it's a business. They're trying to make money. They're trying to publish books that have a wide readership that they know how to reach. And if you don't, it's like Allison was saying, is this a book? It's also, is this a book that has a chance of reaching that commercial bar?
One of my favorite quotes that Jane has ever said is, everybody has a story worth telling. Not everybody's story is worthy of a commercial publishing deal.
It's so true, right? So, really getting clear on why you want to do this. And if your answer is, I want to reach for that really high bar, I want to try to make money with my writing, which, you got to read Jane's book because that's a whole thing. But know why you're doing it. And if that is your answer, then maybe you want to invest in the kind of help that could help you reach that bar, and just like Olympic athlete, we don't know that you're going to win the gold medal, but you're going to have the best possible chance of getting that thing. But on your first book that you've written when you've never done it before and you've been immersed in another career your whole life, I don't know that you can reach that goal without help. It'd be like, I was thinking about this during the pandemic. I did some painting and I have zero training in painting. I don't know a thing about it. It just was a thing I decided to do. And I would copy people, which is like a grand tradition of how you learn how to paint. And I was very pleased with my paintings. I thought they came out really well, and I hung them on my wall. They're in the hallway out there. And, it was delightful and I loved it. But like, I did not think I'm going to take these paintings down to the gallery, where paintings are sold for $20,000 and see if they want to put this on their wall. Like, that wouldn't occur to me in a million years. That was not why I did it. So I think being honest and clear about what you want, and then aligning what you're willing to invest in based on that truth. That's what I would suggest.
Wonderful. So with the few minutes we have left, let's go through some questions. Allie says she's working on a fantasy novel, and she definitely falls on the planning side because she feels it's going to save her time, but she's getting paralyzed trying to make the best decisions for the plot. So her question is, how do you recommend balancing planning with writing, especially for those who might just get bogged down in the planning?
Well, I think it can be really useful to actually specifically plan your time. Like, go ahead and make a calendar for yourself that, okay, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Fridays, I work on beautiful creative work. I am a gorgeous free spirit going wherever the creative muse takes me. And then Wednesdays and Thursdays, that's when I sit down and go, okay, this belongs here, that belongs there. This scene isn't tense enough. It really can help to separate your writing from your revision. And that stops you second guessing yourself in that first draft where you're just trying to get it down on the page.
Anne asks, you talked about revision as bulldozing. Jennie, that was you, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anne says she's working on the third draft of a novel, and she's deleted and rewritten hundreds of pages, no exaggeration. She wants her manuscript to be strong, but is this amount of rewriting normal? She's exhausted, but still devoted.
I love that description. And that's so beautiful. Exhausted, but devoted. I feel like that's kind of true for life right now. I would say, like, what's normal? Who knows? I don't know. But I would say that every serious writer I know throws out a lot of pages. That is just what the work is. I think that that's pretty par for the course. So, your normal is what matters here. But, I would suggest that maybe there's something where you're seeking some kind of a thread or a spine or a structure that you're not quite landing on, and that finding a way to assess in a different way to get to a different place might be more efficient. That's all I can say. Do you have anything to add to that, Allison?
I think you've covered it.
Diana has a question about voice. She's seen first drafts that have a great voice, but then after they've been self-edited, they don't sound the same. Do you have tips on how not to lose your voice when you edit? Allison?
I do. And a lot of it really is experience. A lot of it is going into your own work over and over and over again and fixing to the point where writing better in your own voice becomes natural. It's like someone who is training to be a ballet dancer. In class, they're thinking, okay, I'm going to plie and I'm kind of stiff here. And oh, this tendu hurts my leg. And the teacher's going to yell at me again if I don't get my shoulder down. But once they reach that place where they're performing, those movements are happening automatically. They are not having to think through the steps. And writing in your own voice is like that. There does tend to be a stage where you go through and you get a little fixie and it's like, ooh, maybe this character actually needs to speak with some contractions, which I have taken out because I thought not contracting sounded like good writing. And so it really just is explore your voice, fix, tweak, tinker, and then write again until your voice starts to flow naturally in the way that you would like it to be.
Do either of you have suggestions for how to find beta readers?
Facebook writers groups.
There are also some softwares out there, like services as software, that help you manage the process. I'll put the links in the chat if anyone's interested in exploring those. Let's see. Casey wonders about whether or not to find a new editor. So she's in draft 9 of her memoir, and she's seeing the plot take shape and the arc reveal itself. But she's wondering if should she go back to the same editor who did the most recent full read, have them do another pass? Should she find someone new? And I know a lot of writers face this dilemma.
I'd suggest another round of solid, trusted beta reading before you dive back into an expensive professional edit. You know the things that your previous editor brought up, and you can give them a list and say, okay, did I address this? Did I address this? Is this clear now? Be really specific with them. And this might be a professional beta reader who, would do it for money rather than for free, but who would return it on time and correctly. Or this might be a writing friend who you trust and admire and respect. And it could be really useful to have somebody read it through, give you their thoughts on what's working, what's not, and then give them a list of questions and say, and do you think I also addressed this other stuff? And that might be worth it rather than plunking down another chunk of cash. But Jennie, what do you think?
I love that answer. I think that's really smart. A weird thing can happen when you bounce around from editor to editor. It can become kind of like writing by committee too. And we're talking about a subjective thing here. Writing is a subjective thing. There are objective measures to good writing, but every editor is going to take a different approach to the work. And sometimes if you introduce a different person, they come at it with a whole different thing, and it can kind of throw you. So I like Allison's idea to process what you've learned and see how that lands and rest in that. And if you've been happy with that editor's work, perhaps go back to them to, again after that. But I guess I would suggest only changing if you were really unhappy for some reason. But in that case, I don't think you would have stuck with them for 9 drafts.
Okay, so here's the question we'll close things out on, which I think is appropriate. Your advice for writing during hard times. And we'll start with Jennie.
Yeah, I think this is a really appropriate question. It is man, these times are hard that we're in. They just seem like they keep getting harder. And I mean, so I would say that there's 2 things. One is very personal and particular to you, and the other is more global, I guess. The personal particular thing would be to use the energy of whatever you're going through. If you're feeling grief or despair, probably there's places in your book where there's a place for grief or despair, to use that where you are in your own life and self to bring that to the work. It can be quite powerful and I sometimes know writers who do this, who kind of ride the waves of what they're feeling or their emotions or their energy and save part of a book to write until they're feeling that thing, because they can really tap into it. So that would be the personal thing. And then the global thing would be, just to remember what we're all doing here. Books matter so much, and telling stories of all kinds matter so much. I mean, funny stories, escapist stories in which we learn, stories in which we learn about history or other people's or all the things. There is nothing more important in the whole wide world than that. And to remember the power of that, and that when you're trying to write and you're learning to write and you're doing this hard work, you're part of that. You're part of that good. It's the most noble thing I think humans do in many ways, which is write these books for others to share and to understand and to grow. And so just to tap into that energy, and that no matter if the whole world's going down in flames, I think that energy is still there. I'd like to think till the end of time.
I would add to that, writing should bring you joy. It might not be fun, because often writing isn't fun, but often it's better than fun. it takes too much time and too much focus and too much of your creative energy to do it if it is not bringing you joy. And so if you are in hard times and writing brings you joy, then turn yourself to the page. If writing does not bring you joy, seek out another activity and fill your beautiful hours with that. It can really help as well to find someone you like to do it with. I do my best writing when I am sitting across the table from a writing buddy. We sit down, we check in on what we're going to accomplish, and then we type. And that brings me joy to be there and be supported by somebody else and be supporting somebody else in this largely solitary work. So I hope everybody that your writing is bringing you joy.
That's beautiful.
Amen.
Thanks.
Jennie, Allison, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today. I'm going to pass things back over to Catherine for our closing.
Thank you, Jane.
This has been just amazing to have you all with us and to have so much wisdom. I know that a lot of people who joined us here tonight are going to want to check out the recording later and watch it over again and catch the things they might have missed. So be sure to do that. Take a look at the virginiabook.org website. They will have a recording of this up relatively soon, and they have lots of other resources you might be interested in. Also check us out at jamesriverwriters.org. We have a lot of resources for writers and a great community that can help support you when you're getting all that writing going. I think the support is one of the most important pieces. So it's time to wrap up, and we just want to thank everybody for being here. If you haven't, please consider buying the books of our featured speakers either through your independent bookstore, yay, independent bookstores, or with the link that's on the Virginia Festival of the Book website. They have specific sponsors, so please consider supporting the sponsors and also indie bookstores, and check out the other events. And that is all we have for tonight. So thank you everybody for being with us, and have a great evening. Good luck with your writing.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a good night.